Hello, my name is Stephen Denman. My organisation is Shining Guidance. My website is shiningguidance.com. I'd like to talk to you today about the origins of Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. It includes Asperger's syndrome, and then go on in the second half of the talk to kind of show how workplace protocol and procedures and routines and just the general kind of daily routine of actually having to go to work is a real struggle for many hundreds of thousands of individuals who have various types of autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So we're going to look at the history now of the two main individuals who are very famous in their own right, who really created the foundational academic understanding of what became known as autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. The first individual was the Austrian American psychiatrist who was also a physician and social activist who was known as Chaskel Liebkana. He became better known as Leo Kanner, and he really kind of created the foundational definitive meaning of autism spectrum disorder, ASD. And that occurred in 1943 because he wrote a research paper called Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact, and that was published in a very unique and unusual journal for the time, which was a journal of psychopathology as well as psychotherapy, mental hygiene, and adult guidance for children. That was called Nervous Child. Very interesting that the journal was called Nervous Child, because if you think about it, he was looking at the early childhood traumas of individuals that he was studying that had these various autistic traits and characteristics. And you've got to remember, Chaskel Liebkana, he seemed to recognize, very perceptive and intelligent man, that these children must have suffered early childhood traumas that were heavily imprinted into their subconscious minds. He also fully understood there was a genetic and hereditary component as well that had been passed on in the genealogy of their family. The second individual who contributed really to the academic understanding of autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, was the Austrian physician called Johann Friedrich Karl Asperger, who became better known as Hans Asperger. Now, he developed extensive kinds of early studies on atypical neurology, specifically where he was studying young children, and eventually he became the namesake of the autism spectrum disorder, ASD condition known as Asperger's syndrome. Now, we know that Johann Friedrich Karl Asperger also wrote a very profound and very relevant type of research paper that he titled Autistic Psychopathy in Childhood. And he wrote and he published that journal in 1940, so 3 years before the journal titled Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact was written and published by Chaskel Liebkana, who became better known as Leo Kanner. Now, if you then look at what was kind of defined at the time as Asperger's syndrome, it was never given that name. Those autistic groupings of characteristics and traits were not really given any definitive name until 1976. And that's when the very, very famous English psychiatrist who was called Lorna Gladys Wing actually coined the phrase Asperger's syndrome. So up until 1976, it was just given a loose grouping definition. It was just seen as specific characteristics and traits that were repeatedly seen as similar or identical in many thousands of children. And obviously this had all really arisen out of that really incredible research paper, Autistic Psychopathy in Childhood, which Johann Friedrich Karl Asperger, who became better known as Hans Asperger, had written and published in 1940. So it wasn't until 1976 when that English psychiatrist called Lorna Gladys Wing actually further defined it and really gave specific meaning to these certain groupings of traits and characteristics in the autism spectrum disorder, ASD, that then became known as Asperger's syndrome, which is now a very common mental neurological condition in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and across mainland Europe and across many other parts of the world. Now, I want to now take the information I've given concerning the foundational development of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, including Asperger's syndrome, and look at how individuals who are mildly autistic and probably in the intermediate stage of autism including having, Asperger's syndrome or aspects of Asperger's syndrome, cope on a day-by-day basis in the workplace, regardless if they're working a 9 to 5 job, Monday to Friday, 8 hour, 10 hour, 12 hour, 14 hour shifts, day shifts, night shifts, weekends, or bank holidays, working over a Christmas period, regardless of whether they're covering maternity leave or sick leave, or individuals doing jury duty or anything else in this country, or that would include the equivalent in any other country across mainland Europe or the United States of America, Canada, Latin America, and so forth. And we know that a lot of individuals who are, autistic in some way, they find they have to try and be as conscious of themselves as possible to try and shield and hide those characteristics, because in the workplace there are specific types of protocols and health and safety guidelines and procedures and instructions that you're given by, a team leader or a supervisor, a line manager, or a departmental manager, which are coming down from senior management, in how they want that business or organization to be effectively run day by day. And so people that, have some type of autistic characteristics, including Asperger's syndrome, they tend to be unusual in their behaviour, quite eccentric. They're non-conformist in their types of communication and the style of communication they use, including the intonation pattern. That's the tone of their voices when they're talking with individuals, and they will sometimes go on to a great diatribe, an intense dialogue in minute detail on specific subject matter that they are very, very aware of. They have a great discernment about, because as you all know, people that are on the Autism Spectrum Disorder or ASD kind of range, whether it's with Aspergers or any other aspects, including individuals that may have Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, or OCD, or ADHD, or anything else, tend to be extremely intelligent. They have incredible cognitive potency and abilities, far and above average human beings, and that is why, if people early on who have autistic issues in the workplace are recognized by their supervisors, their line managers, or departmental managers as having those conditions, they can be steered in the right direction with coaching and mentoring, and actually be given, a sympathetic ear. They can be given that empathy and understanding to try and reevaluate how they can be effectively integrated on that Monday to Friday or 9 to 5 basis, or whatever shift patterns they're working. And that includes in any kind of job. That could be in any kind of job. That can be working, in an office, an administrative environment. It could be working in local government. It could be working in central government. It could be working in retail outlets or factories. It could be working, at a railway station. It could be working in social services, for a county council. It could be working in any kind of environment, including a help desk technician type role, a customer service advisor type role, working from home, working remotely, where they have to kind of achieve on a day-by-day basis their key performance indicators or KPIs, and make sure they're making that effort and they're getting that phone call from their supervisor or line manager or departmental manager. That causes a lot of stress for people who are autistic, because they have got to make sure they're performing correctly, doing the tasks they're given every day, reaching their objectives and targets, completing those procedures, making sure there's effective handovers. And at the same time, they're having to shield off their own inner mental health issues, their own neurological issues, because they are, they have some type of autistic, characteristic or traits that's very strong, and they've got to try and control that and be as consciously aware of the tone of their voice, not to talk too loudly or whisper, or therefore talk too quietly and inappropriately in the wrong type of situation. And not talk repeatedly in a monotone voice constantly, in almost like a robotic fashion, and try also to control their dialogue so that they're not going to go off into great tangents and divergences and start, reeling off vast amounts of intricate data and information that then overwhelms work colleagues who think, what on earth is this individual talking about? So you've got to remember also that a lot of people who are on the Autism Spectrum Disorder or ASD range are very frightened and concerned of being stigmatized or ridiculed or mocked in the workplace for having autistic traits, because there's still a lot of ignorance in a lot of people, and a lot of team leaders or supervisors or line managers and departmental managers in workplaces across the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and in mainland Europe, the United States of America and Canada and so forth. They're not trained, they're not certificated or accredited to deal with people that are autistic, male or female, and therefore there's no emphasis put on it. They just classes, crackpots or loonies or weirdos, or they're not seen for what those issues are. So other aspects that are a real struggle in the workplace for people that are autistic include having difficulty with time management. That's making sure they turn up early for work, that they can complete their tasks on time before they clock out, whether that's digitally or electronically or by signing a time in, time out form for their duty roster. They find that difficult. And time management in regard to scheduling time through the day to complete specific tasks. So prioritization of workloads and tasks and getting them accomplished when you're expected to do so, or near enough to when you're expected to do so, can be a real struggle, because they're dealing with their own inner mental and neurological issues because of the Autism Spectrum Disorder or ASD condition they've got, including Asperger's syndrome. And Asperger's is very common and is massively undiagnosed in hundreds of thousands of individuals across the United Kingdom of Great Britain. And many of those people are probably quite conscious that they're not quite, shall we say, normal, in the sense of whatever normal is, because being human in itself, in my opinion, means you're not normal, because there's nothing normal about being human on this crazy world we live on. So another problem that a lot of people that are autistic have in the workplace can be sensory into action and perception issues concerning how they read, listen receptively, and then relay information to both work colleagues and then perhaps at the same time to customers or clients, or that may be visitors, it may be senior management, it may be contractors and so forth. And at the same time as all this is going on, all these poor individual, autistic people are then trying to cope with the fact they're always worried and feeling social anxiety, they're feeling very emotionally stressed, maybe confused. And they want rigidity, they want fixated patterns of very intricate repeating consistency and regularity in the workplace, because then they feel safe and calm and relaxed and they can cope. Anything that's literally left field that kind of challenges that can overwhelm them. They get into a state of panic, they have internal panic attacks, they feel rushes of fear and anxiety, and then they have to try and control that. So you can see that people that are autistic, their mental health can sometimes feel for them, very fragile. Although it's not, because actually autistic people, their mental health tends to be much more robust than other individuals, because they're dealing with it constantly, literally every waking moment, Monday to Sunday, 24/7, day in, day out, week after week, month after month, year after year, for decades on end. Whereas the majority of human beings aren't remotely interested in being self-aware, are not interested in self-development. A minority of individuals are, but autistic individuals have no choice, because you've got to have coping mechanisms. And in the workplace, when you've got a busy schedule dealing with customers or clients, you've got a huge amount of work tasks to complete. It doesn't matter what it is. You could be working in transportation and logistics, you could be working in a hospital, you could be working in counselling. There's people that are actually autistic who actually make fantastic counsellors and psychotherapists. And one of the reasons is because they have to go on that journey of self-awareness, simply because it's the only method they can use to actually cope. So that's very interesting. In the workplace also, you have to remember that intense, impulsive desire for a consistent, repeated, fixated type of schedule is something that every autistic individual, male or female, craves for. They're so desperate for that, because it keeps them calm and relaxed. You'll never find any autistic individual make any mistake while they're calm and relaxed, like the vast majority of human beings. When they get really het up and stressed and emotionally feel frightened, have anxiety, especially with this large crowds of other humans, so they get this collectivized social anxiety, they find it overwhelming. And anything that's too left field, too sporadic, that needs a rapid response, and they haven't had time to think. And you've got to remember, people that are autistic, including those with Asperger's syndrome, are very logical thinkers. They like to plan methodically everything out in a very calm and fixated way. Anything that challenges or threatens that is overwhelming, and then at that point they become very nervous and make mistakes. They look incompetent, That then leads to another problem in the workplace where they take their own errors and mistakes very personally. If a team leader or a supervisor or a line manager or a departmental manager or a senior manager in that business or organization that that autistic individual is employed in, you know, actually, is having to face up to and say, okay, that I've made a mistake, and that individual, male or female autistic person, is then going to really take that in deeply and think, oh, I'm not adequate, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And every one of us, every single human being, regardless of whether they've got mental or neurological conditions of any kind, it makes no difference. Every single human being makes mistakes every day of their lives, every day of every week, of every month, on some other. They can be small mistakes, they can be big mistakes. Being human means that you make mistakes. That's what this whole existence is about. And the 3D holographic reality of the material dimension is actually kind of just honoring yourself and saying it's all right to make mistakes. But autistic individuals in the workplace, for them it's catastrophic, because the mistake means that they have in some way made fragile the fixated seeming solidity of their own routines, where they think as long as they stick to those patterns and routines, nothing can go wrong. But of course, that's not taking into account all the probabilities and the X factors that occur in human nature, which happens all the time. We all know the chaos of being human is a natural part of living. There's a craziness in being a Homo sapien on planet Earth. It really is. So, but autistic individuals are very emotionally sensitive, and God bless them all for that. Because being emotionally sensitive is a fantastic characteristic, and we need more people who are emotionally sensitive. So, making errors and mistakes is really centered on social anxiety issues and feeling overwhelmed when those fixated patterns are threatened or challenged in any way. Those errors can be minor, they could be major errors, and they will seem like incompetence. Now, a perceptive team leader or supervisor or line manager or departmental manager or senior manager in the business or organization that employs that autistic individual will be savvy enough to understand what's going on, will take them aside, bring them into the management office and just sit them down, make them a cup of tea or coffee and have a quiet, empathic and kind and gentle, non-judgmental conversation with them. If there has been training given on autism spectrum disorder, ASD conditions within that business or organization, and sadly the vast majority do not have that kind of safeguarding type of training. And yet we should have a lot more mental health and physical safeguarding types of training. We have it for vulnerable adults, we have it for children. We need it a lot more for individuals that have certain only minor types of mental and neurological conditions. They leave absolutely, they can live absolutely wonderfully perfect and normal lives. They can end up being very successful in their careers and famous in their own right because they're so unique and so eccentric. That's a wonderful thing. But yeah, it's a real struggle. The workplace is a real struggle for people who are autistic. The majority of them are very frightened of actually admitting that they have any kind of neurological condition. They know that there's a lot of judgment from people. Oh, that person's a weirdo. There's a kind of sense of, oh, they could be ridiculed, they could be attacked, they could be mocked. So they don't like to say too much. And I fully understand that. I fully understand that. So you've got to remember the fantastic work of the Austrian-American psychiatrist and physician and social activist known as Chasko Liebkana, and the fantastic work of the Austrian physician known as Johann Friedrich Karl Asperger. Both those individuals really were incredible men. The information they provided, the research and the academic-based acumen that they used in just their behavioural observations and collating data and statistics and repeated characters and traits that they saw in children. And you've got to remember when Chasko Liebkana wrote that research paper called Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact, and when Johann Friedrich Karl Asperger wrote his research paper titled Autistic Psychopathy in Childhood, neither of those two individuals would have any inkling of how influential their own scientific and academic research would become in really understanding different types of autism spectrum disorder or ASD conditions in the modern world. And it seems to me that as time goes by, more and more men and women, and especially women, because 90% of those who have some kind of autism spectrum disorder or ASD condition tend to be male, 10% tend to be female. But it's not exactly 90-10 as a ratio. There's vast numbers of females that have Aspergers, as one example, who are very frightened of coming forward and openly admitting that they've got that kind of mental and neurological condition. It seems to be much more of a stigma for females than it is for males. And I'm glad to say that's all changing, and a lot more females are starting to step forward and are looking for official diagnosis from their GPs. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. Autism is a wonderful thing. It makes you intellectually far superior to many other people. You just need to have that self belief, and in the workplace, you can step forward and train and get academically focused in specific areas and excel intellectually, get certificated, get accredited, get promoted, get that wonderful pay rise, believe in yourself, surround yourself with supportive work colleagues, you support them also and their needs, be empathic, be understanding. And I think, I'm going to bring this talk to an end now. I've really given a lot of information, and I hope you've enjoyed watching my presentation. I've certainly enjoyed giving you the information. It's been fascinating to talk about, and there'll be many more talks to come in the very near future. But yeah, just on a lasting note, yeah, it's a real challenge for people who are autistic in the workplace. They find life very, very overwhelming, and they hide it. Most of the time, they hide it very well. Those who are severely autistic, they cannot even hold down a 9 to 5 job, Monday to Friday, or ever work an 8 hour, 10 hour, 12 hour, 14 hour shift, let alone be amongst, hundreds of other work colleagues, or even work from home remotely. They just can't cope with any of it. They find it so frightening. There's so much social anxiety, and they can barely cope with their own thoughts and their own emotions on a daily basis. So let's all have more empathy and understanding for autistic individuals, and let's realize it's a much more widespread social phenomena than is openly admitted scientifically and academically here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, or in any part of mainland Europe, or the United States of America, or Canada, or any other part of planet Earth. And on that note, I'm going to say farewell, and once again, thank you for watching this video presentation. There'll be more to come in the near future. Take care, everyone.